ones who let me down and taught me what I know now of forgiveness and the freedom I found. Thank you. Yeah. When I look at the world around me and breathe in the breath you gave, every beat of my heart is saying thank you for everything. If you lead me to
Welcome to a special episode 9 of Followers of the Cross podcast. This is your host, Jason Reynolds. The opening music you heard was titled Thank You for Everything from CCM artist Jason Gray. Jason has given me permission to use clips of his music. Today's episode is a little bit different from other podcasts. Although Jason is an award-winning musician, he has a speech impediment. Jason has battled a stuttering issue since he was in the first grade. He told me that he basically dared God to heal him in order to become a spokesman for the Lord. He lost that dare, he says. Jason and I discussed whether to produce our interview as a podcast, and he graciously agreed to do so. I just want you, my listener, to be aware of his stuttering before you begin listening to the interview. Personally, I believe Jason is one of the bravest professionals I have ever had the pleasure to interview. He goes out before thousands of people on a regular basis to sing to glorify God. The Lord has made Jason's weakness into a strength, turning him into a mighty warrior for the kingdom. Jason Gray's testimony goes far beyond this issue. He has overcome many other things to become a mighty warrior. And now to the program. Hello, Jason.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. So, Jason, we have several things going on here as far as topics to discuss. One of which is just the fact that you've so amazingly been able to do this wonderful music career despite having some speech impediment issues. And like I've mentioned to you previously, I have to overcome a little bit of that, but maybe not quite to the extent that you do. Can you talk a little bit about how that fit, how that works around your career?
Yeah, the way that I understand it, my stuttering is something that existed in me. I was genetically predisposed to it, and then it was triggered by a traumatic event, which was the divorce of my parents. So that began in the first grade, and that complicated a lot of things. It was especially complicated as I began to have a sense of God's calling on my life, and I used to argue with him about it, saying, Lord, you can't make me your spokesperson until you make it so I can speak, And I don't know if you've ever had this experience or not, but when you tell God that he can't do something, it's like a dare that he can't resist, And so basically I do what I do because I lost a dare with the Lord, But I used to imagine that it was a problem, a liability, and I used to think that my story would be that I used to have a speech impediment, but God healed me, and so now I can speak to you. But that's not my story. I discovered that though God didn't heal me of my speech impediment, He did a lot of healing in my life through my speech impediment. There were important things that I only know because I grew up having a speech handicap, and those are so valuable to me. I've come to understand my speech and all of my brokenness actually as this remarkable gift, and not a liability at all, because I suspect that you like me a little bit more because I have a speech impediment, and the more you and I talk, and the more I become acquainted with your brokenness, the more I'm going to like you too, the more safe we're going to feel in each other's presence, because our strengths only make us afraid of each other and intimidated by each other. But if we can be open and authentic about our imperfections, our brokenness, then all of a sudden, it's like, oh, me too, or oh, he's not perfect either. That means I don't have to hide anymore. I can stop pretending, and then we can begin to really bring ourselves to each other. And I think there's healing in that. I think there is the possibility for healing in that because of that verse, where Jesus says, "Wherever two or more are gathered in my name, there I am with them." And I used to imagine that what that meant was that if I was really serious about this thing that I was praying about, if I really wanted God's attention, if I really wanted Him to do something, it means I got to find somebody else, and we got to pray, and it's a formula because if two or more of us are gathered, then He's going to pay attention, which is a very manipulative way of understanding that verse, But I've come to interpret it more as that you have the life of Christ alive in you, and I have the life of Christ alive in me. And therefore, when we come together, we bring the living presence of Christ to each other. We bring Jesus to each other. And if we can come together with the life of Christ inside of each of us, and if we can come together authentically and open about our brokenness, then there's just something very powerful that can happen in that, I believe. And so, I think, on the outside, or at first glance, I suppose it looks absurd that a guy with a speech handicap is speaking on a microphone each night, But the beautiful thing that happens is that because I have a speech impediment, because I have this very obvious imperfection that announces itself, that goes before me, I think there's something about that helps set the audience at ease and helps them feel like, oh, I can be vulnerable here because he's not perfect either. And so it has become one of the great gifts in my life, for sure.
For sure. And I believe that was an issue for Moses.
Yeah. He's my boy. He's Moses. I think, I think about that story a lot of when Moses is in the presence of God, and God is telling him, I need you to go to Egypt, I need you to do this thing. And Moses argues with him with this long list of reasons why he's not the right guy for the job. And included in that is, that I'm not good with speech. I stutter and stammer. And there's a moment in that story that I think is so powerful. The way that God answers that is he asks Moses a question. He says, Moses, what's in your hand? And Moses has to say, a staff. And what I think is remarkable about that is that it had to be a reminder to Moses of how far he'd fallen. Because earlier in his life, he would have held a scepter, which is a symbol of power, strength, and authority. And, the kind of power that can get stuff done. And instead he has to answer with shame, a staff. I no longer am a person of influence. All I have is a staff that I use in my lowly work of shepherding, And I think that's significant because I interpret that as God is telling Moses and telling all of us, it doesn't matter what we think is in our hand. It doesn't matter what we think we have to bring to the table. All that matters is that we come to the table, and that the Lord is more likely to use Moses when he's not holding the scepter, when he's not a person of power and influence. But God waits to use him until he's a loser out in the middle of nowhere,
Amen.
holding the staff, It's a powerful story. When I was in high school, I used to think, like I was a new believer, and I thought, okay, I know what to do now. I know that I need to bring the gospel to the coolest guy in our grade, because if he becomes a Christian, then everyone else will come along because he's going to make it cool, and that's just, I was young and naive and imagined that the kingdom of God could be released upon the earth through coolness and power and all that kind of stuff. And my life has been a journey of understanding that no, the kingdom of God is released in the world through brokenness, through the humbled, and people in low places.
I only came to faith after a very broken period of my life, a period of that included divorce in my life. And I mean, I'm married again now through the grace of God to a very godly woman.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that point in your life recently?
Yeah. I think a marriage dies long before it gets to divorce court, and my experience, and I believe my ex-wife would agree with this too, was that our marriage was a slow death over about 8 or 9 years, In that time, we both tried in our way, I believe, but our marriage did end in divorce, and this is the most painful thing that I've ever experienced, and feeling helpless, watching this thing that I loved so very much. I watched it dying, and all of my efforts to do something were it didn't work, and just so painful. I remember in the midst of it thinking, over half of all marriages fail. I was like, that means there's like half the population, half of these people around me have gone through this, and they're still walking. How does anybody survive that? How does anybody survive this, let alone half the population, I wouldn't wish it upon my worst enemy. I think like a person who gets cancer, they get this education that they never wanted to have about how the body works and food and all that kind of stuff, which is a very valuable information that will change the way that you live your life. But you were forced into that knowledge, into that school, by a sickness that you didn't want. Divorce is a lot like that. Nobody enters into marriage believing that it'll end, but in divorce, you do get this education about how the human heart works, how your own heart works, and there are a lot of things that I am